Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. This morning we'll be looking at a fairly well-known sutta from the Samyutta Nikaya. So this is Samyutta Nikaya chapter 36, the Vedana Samyutta, sutta number 6, called the Salla Sutta, which is translated here as the Thorn. So as usual, I'll read through the sutta and periodically give some explanations, and then I'll take any questions you have at the end. The sutta begins. This is the Buddha speaking. Monks, the uneducated commoner feels pleasant feelings, unpleasant feelings, and neutral feelings. Monks, an educated disciple of the noble ones, also feels pleasant feelings, unpleasant feelings, and neutral feelings. Monks, in this case, what is the difference? What is the distinction? What is the variance between an educated disciple of the noble ones and an uneducated commoner? So this is the opening of the sutta, so introducing the topic that the Buddha is going to speak about. And in this case, he's introducing it as a question that he's asking to the monks who are assembled there. So sometimes this is how the Buddha would begin a discourse, is that he would ask a question to the people who are gathered, and he would see what they said. If they gave a correct answer or an incorrect answer, or sometimes they just wouldn't answer at all. They would say that they would rather hear the answer from the Buddha. And the topic he's bringing up is the issue of feelings. So in Buddhism, we say that there are 3 kinds of feelings. So pleasant feeling, unpleasant feeling, and neutral feeling. So any sensation that we have, we tend to label it in one of these 3 ways. So for example, when you eat something, you might perceive it as a pleasant flavor, in which case you like it, or you perceive it as an unpleasant flavor, in which case you dislike it, or you might perceive it as neutral. So perhaps a food which is, you don't really like it, but you don't really dislike it. It's something that you tolerate, but that you don't have any kind of strong feeling about either way. So we have this, every single sensation that we have, we respond to in one of these 3 ways. We either perceive it as pleasant, as unpleasant, or as neither, as a neutral sensation. And the Buddha here is bringing in one of the common pairs that he uses, as he talks about 2 kinds of people. The asuttava patujana, translated here as uneducated commoner. So asuttava literally means one who has not heard. And this term is commonly used in the suttas to mean somebody who doesn't know much about the Buddha's teachings. So uneducated here doesn't mean science and history and math and so on. Uneducated here means somebody who doesn't know the Buddha's teachings, doesn't know the Dhamma. And this can either mean somebody who just hasn't studied the Dhamma at all, or hasn't learned much of the Dhamma, or it can also mean somebody who maybe they have some intellectual knowledge of the Buddha's teachings, but they don't really understand it. So I've met many people over the years who they've read some books about Buddhism, but they just don't get it. They just don't understand what the Buddha is talking about. Maybe they can recite the 4 Noble Truths and the Noble Eightfold Path, and They can tell you some of the ideas that the Buddha spoke about, but they don't understand on a deep level. There's no direct experience of the truth of the Buddha's words. And the other word here, patujana. So putu means broad, and jana means populace. So patujana means all the ordinary people, the majority. So the majority of people. And the distinction he's making here is with the Arya Savaka. So Arya means noble and Savaka means disciple or student. Literally, Savaka means listener. So Arya Savaka, one who listens to the noble ones, who tries to follow the path of the noble ones. And noble ones here means those who have attained some stage of awakening. So the Buddha is drawing this distinction. So there's, on the one hand, you have a person who doesn't understand the Buddha's teachings. It's just an ordinary person like most people, doesn't understand the Buddha's teachings, is just living an ordinary life like everybody else. And on the other hand, we have somebody who has learned the Buddha's teachings, has a deep understanding of the Buddha's teachings, and is really trying to follow the path of the awakened ones. So the Buddha says both of these people are going to experience sensations, and both of them are going to experience pleasant, painful, and neutral sensations. So what's the difference between the two? And the monks who are assembled here, they reply, Bhante, our teachings are rooted in the Blessed One, guided by the Blessed One, based on the Blessed One. Bhante, it would be wonderful if the Blessed One would elucidate the meaning of this statement. Having heard it from the Blessed One, the monks will remember it. So here, in this case, the monks said that they didn't want to answer the Buddha's question. They would rather get the answer from him. So the Buddha says, therefore, monks, listen and carefully pay attention. I will speak. Yes, Bhante, those monks replied to the Blessed One. The Blessed One said this. So here the Buddha begins on the explanation. He says, monks, when an uneducated commoner is touched by a painful sensation, he sorrows, frets, and laments, beating his chest and wailing, and becomes confused. He feels two feelings, one physical and one mental. Monks, it is just like a person who has been pierced by a thorn. Then he is pierced again by a second thorn. Monks, in the same way, the person feels the feeling of two thorns. And he carries on, he says, monks, in the same way, when an uneducated commoner is touched by a painful sensation, he sorrows, frets, and laments, beating his chest and wailing, and becomes confused. He feels two feelings, physical and mental. When touched by that painful feeling, he is aversive. Since he is aversive towards that painful feeling, the tendency of aversion towards painful feelings is latent in him. When touched by painful feelings, he seeks delight in sensual pleasure. Why is that? Monks, an uneducated commoner does not know any escape from painful feelings other than sensual pleasure. Since he seeks delights in sensual pleasure, the tendency of passion towards pleasant feelings is latent in him. He does not accurately understand the origin, disappearance, appeal, drawback, and escape regarding those feelings. Since he does not accurately understand the origin, disappearance, appeal, drawback, and escape regarding those feelings, the tendency of ignorance towards neutral feelings is latent in him. So here the Buddha is pointing out how the uneducated ordinary person, when they're experiencing a painful sensation, then they fall into aversion, desire, and ignorance. So these three basic flaws that we so easily drop into. So he starts off with introducing the title of the sutta. So the title of the sutta is the Thorn. So the simile of the thorn is somebody who's been pierced by a thorn. So again, maybe you're out walking in the forest and you're not paying attention to where you go and you step on a thorn. But then right away, then you pierce yourself with another thorn. As if one wasn't bad enough, you go and you jab in another one. So, in other words, we have a painful sensation through our body. And that's unavoidable. That's just an ordinary part of having a body, is that a body produces painful sensations. But then we have a choice. When we experience a painful sensation through the body, we can make a decision what we're going to do about it, how we're going to react, how we're going to respond to that sensation. So the uneducated commoner responds by getting sad or depressed or angry or upset, freaking out and getting all disturbed and wailing and crying and becoming very agitated and unhappy. But that's all unnecessary. That's just stabbing yourself with a second thorn. It's generating extra unnecessary pain for yourself. So adding mental pain to the physical pain. Then he points out that when the ordinary uneducated commoner is having a painful feeling, then there's the tendency to be aversive towards that painful feeling. So you want that painful feeling to stop. You want that, you hate the feeling. You are annoyed by the feeling. So then this is the tendency towards aversion. So in Pali it's patiga. So patiga means resistance or rejection or aversion. And if you have a tendency towards aversion regarding any sensation, well, the tendency towards aversion can appear in relationship to anything. So as long as we're continuing to harbor and build up aversion towards any particular experience, then that increases the likelihood of us having aversion towards other experiences as well. So we become increasingly grumpy. So the more we hold on to our hatred for that painful feeling, the more we maintain and build up our aversion towards that painful feeling, then the grumpier and more irritable we become. And the more likely we are to be irritated by other experiences in our life as well. Next, the Buddha makes this very interesting statement. This is one of the quotes from the suttas that I remember over and over again. He says, when touched by painful feelings, one seeks delight in sensual pleasure. Why is that? An uneducated commoner does not know any escape from painful feelings other than sensual pleasure. So in other words, the ordinary person who doesn't understand the Buddha's teachings, when they're feeling any kind of displeasure or discomfort, then their tendency is to try to escape it by seeking out some kind of pleasant experience. So a common example of this is, so an ordinary person who's not living in a monastery, when they're feeling depressed or bored, they might go to the kitchen and have a snack. So seeking some kind of pleasant sensation to distract them from their discomfort. Or when somebody's, again, they're depressed or they're having a hard time, then they go out and try to have fun. Or they turn on a TV show. Or they watch a movie, or they play some games, or something. Some kind of sensual pleasure to distract them from their pain and their discomfort. So this can be physical pain, but it can also be emotional pain or emotional distress. So the tendency to try to avoid our discomfort by covering it up with pleasure, by covering it up with some kind of pleasant distraction. This is an extremely common strategy that people in the world use. The problem, of course, is that it builds up our desire, our passion, our obsession with sensuality. And it builds up this idea in our mind that the pursuit of sensuality is a valid strategy for dealing with the discomfort and displeasure that we experience in life. So that just keeps pulling us farther and farther away from equanimity and stability of mind. We're constantly trying to flee pain and pursue pleasure, with the underlying delusion that this is somehow going to be a strategy for lasting happiness. When in actuality, it just keeps us constantly disturbed and agitated and confused. Next, the Buddha points out, so one does not accurately understand the origin, disappearance, appeal, drawback, and escape regarding those feelings. So the origin and the disappearance means we don't notice that the sensation is impermanent. Whatever sensation we're having that we're perceiving as painful, that sensation arises and ceases. So it is temporary, it's limited, it's conditional. If you pay attention to any sensation, you'll realize that it has no substance, it has no lasting reality of its own. So there's no reason to make such a big deal about it. If you want a painful feeling to go away, well, just wait. You actually don't have to wait very long. You just need to wait about 100th of a second, and it's gone. And there's something else in its place, which you might also dislike, but that's your problem. You need to learn how to stop hating every sensation that comes your way. But if you watch that feeling, then you'll notice that that feeling also is disappearing, and it's replaced by another one, and that one also is disappearing. So noticing the constant appearing and disappearing of sensations, and noticing that each sensation is different. They're constantly changing. This helps to get us some distance from the feeling, so that we're still clearly aware of the feeling, but because we're paying attention to the impermanence of the feeling, to its insubstantiality, its constant appearing and vanishing, its constant change, then we also recognize that it's not a permanent, lasting source of pain. We recognize that there's no point in taking it seriously, because the feeling has no lasting reality of its own. So there's no point in making a big deal out of it. Recognizing the appeal. So it's easy to see the appeal of pleasant sensations, but there's also a certain appeal in painful sensations. So this is something which needs to be looked closely at. So often when we're feeling some kind of painful feeling, we react strongly to it based upon our self-identity. So, for example, we have this idea like, I am a person who hates cilantro. Completely understandable. So then when you eat something that has cilantro, there can be a tendency to overreact. Like, oh, this is the most horrible food in the world. Admittedly, completely understandable, but it's still an overreaction. So I'm part of the 10% of people who perceive cilantro as utterly vile. But with a calm mind, I'm capable of eating cilantro without reacting negatively. It's a challenge. It's a very strong challenge, in fact, but it's doable. It's something which can be done. So many years ago, I knew a monk who his practice was on his birthday. So commonly on people's birthdays, they try to have only pleasant experiences. So on their birthday, they'll eat their favorite food and do their favorite activities and hang out with their favorite people. But this monk, on his birthday, he would eat the foods that he hates the most. So in his case, he really hated mushrooms, for example. So on his birthday, he would eat, like, everything he ate would have mushrooms in it. And he did this because he was trying to break his aversion towards those tastes. So he took his birthday as the opportunity to work on training his mind, to break free of that aversion. And then the other 364 days of the year, he would go back to avoiding those foods. But one day of the year, on his birthday, he would actively seek out the foods that he disliked and try to perceive them as neutral instead of as unpleasant. So the appeal in hating certain sensations is it's often related to our self-identity, who we think we are. We often define ourselves in terms of our likes and dislikes. I am the person who likes vanilla ice cream and who dislikes chocolate ice cream. That's me. Or I am the person who likes this anime and dislikes that anime. I don't even know what animes are out these days, so I can't name names. Or I'm the person who likes this kind of exercise but dislikes that kind of exercise. Like we form a self-identity around our likes and our dislikes. So then this leads us to dive into that liking and disliking and magnify it far beyond the actual experience. The actual experience is just a physical sensation. The physical sensation itself is just information. It's just sensory information. There's nothing inherently pleasant or painful about it. Pleasure and pain is something that we add to the sensation based upon our preferences. So the drawback is, first off, the drawback that can be observed is the discomfort. Whenever we're engaged in aversion or desire, there's a discomfort in the mind that produces. So aversion is a very uncomfortable and unpleasant state of mind. So when you hate something, then your mind is in a state of discomfort. And desire also has this agitated, unsettled quality to it, which is also quite unpleasant. And in terms of pleasant sensations in particular, the drawback is also in its impermanence and the tendency of things to change. So if you're attached to a pleasant sensation, then you're going to suffer because that sensation changes. Drawback with painful feeling is that it has a tendency to arise whether we want it to or not. So for example, I have a bit of a stomach ache today. Well, that just comes with having a body. Bodies sometimes produce unpleasant sensations. So they're difficult to avoid. In fact, they're effectively unavoidable. It's just part of having a body is that bodies are sometimes in pain. So the drawback is clear in both cases. So the drawback of pleasant feelings is that they change. They're outside of our control, which means that they can change and go away. And the drawback of painful sensations is that they're out of our control. They come and go on their own. Painful sensations appear whenever it's the right conditions for them to appear. So we can't stop all pain from happening. And the escape in regarding to both is the same. The escape is dispassion, equanimity, non-reactivity. This is what leads to unshakable peace and happiness. So here the Buddha is pointing out how, again, when one reacts to a painful feeling, then one is strengthening all three of one's core defilements, greed, hatred, and delusion. We're building up all three of them. And so he emphasizes here, he says, if one feels a pleasant feeling, one is trapped. If one feels a painful feeling, one is trapped. If one feels a neutral feeling, one is trapped. Monks, this is called an uneducated commoner is trapped by birth, decay, death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, depression, and anguish. He is trapped by dissatisfaction, I say. So the word trapped, by the way, is sanyutta. So the same word from which we get Samyutta Nikaya. So sanyutta means tied together or bound together, stuck. So you could also translate that as if one feels a pleasant feeling, one is stuck. If one feels a painful feeling, one is stuck, and so on. So this is indicating how we're trapped by our own preferences. We're trapped by our own self-identity. We're trapped by our own desire and aversion and delusion. And it feels like we're trapped. So when you have a painful sensation, there's this sense of being confined. But what's confining us is our own desire and delusion. It's not the sensation, but it's our delusional reaction to the sensation. That's what traps us and confines us and restricts us and limits us. Then the Buddha gives the opposite side, which is how the practitioner deals with painful feelings. He says, monks, when an educated disciple of the noble ones is touched by a painful sensation, he does not sorrow, fret, lament, beat his chest, wail, or become confused. He feels one feeling, physical, not mental. In other words, one recognizes, okay, there is a painful sensation coming through the body. Big deal. That's just what bodies do. I'm not going to react negatively to this. I'm going to be aware of it, but I'm not going to react with any kind of negativity or aversion. I'm just going to maintain equanimity, mindfulness and equanimity. And he says, monks, it is just like a person who has been pierced by a thorn, but he is not pierced again by a second thorn. In this way, the person feels the feeling of only one thorn. So there's still the physical sensation, but because we're not reacting mentally, then that's as far as it goes. The feeling begins and ends with the body, but it doesn't touch our mind. It doesn't affect the mind. So he says, in the same way, when an educated disciple of the noble ones is touched by a painful sensation, he does not sorrow, fret, lament, beat his chest, wail, or become confused. He feels one feeling, physical, not mental. When touched by that painful feeling, he is not aversive. There's an aspiration for us. Since he is not aversive towards that painful feeling, the tendency of aversion towards painful feelings is not latent in him. So when feeling a painful feeling, try not to be aversive to it. Try to pay attention to it without rejecting it or wanting it to stop or trying to ignore it or avoid it. Pay attention to it and completely accept it as a perfectly ordinary and tolerable part of reality. So in this way, the tendency towards aversion starts to fade away, and the painful feeling stops disturbing us. It doesn't have the power to generate mental pain. It doesn't have the power to break our peace and happiness. And he continues talking about the educated disciple. He says, when touched by painful feelings, one does not seek delight and sensual pleasure. Why is that? Monks, an educated disciple of the noble ones knows an escape from painful feelings other than sensual pleasure. In other words, one recognizes that one can directly escape painful feeling through mindfulness and equanimity. You don't need to distract yourself through sensuality. You don't need to try to cover up your painful feelings with pleasant ones. You don't need to go and get a snack and turn on the TV. Instead, you can just pay attention to the painful feeling, observe it with full awareness, and not react to it with aversion. So just to be completely accepting and tolerant of that sensation, to be patient with that painful sensation. And if you do that, then it has no ability to disturb your mind. So the escape is mindfulness and equanimity. Then you don't need to do anything else. And he says, since he does not seek delight in sensual pleasure, the tendency of passion towards pleasant feelings is not latent in him. In other words, this one also is interesting. By paying attention to pain with mindfulness and equanimity, this means that we're also reducing our desire for pleasure. We're reducing our tendency to be obsessed with seeking out distraction and pleasure. So this practice of giving mindful, non-reactive attention towards pain cuts off not just our aversion, it also reduces our sensual desire. So this is a very important part of Buddhist practice, is learning how to pay mindful, non-reactive attention to pain, because this cuts off both desire and aversion. And the Buddha says, one accurately understands the origin, disappearance, appeal, drawback, and escape regarding those feelings. Since he accurately understands the origin, disappearance, appeal, drawback, and escape regarding those feelings, the tendency of ignorance towards neutral feelings is not latent in him. In other words, since we're paying full attention to the arising and ceasing of these sensations, recognizing the appeal, but also the drawback of these sensations, so that we don't get caught up in reactivity. So either negativity towards the unpleasant, attachment towards the pleasant, or ignorance towards the neutral, then we're able to practice the escape. So practicing mindfulness and equanimity as non-reactive awareness towards the feelings that arise and cease in the body. And the Buddha says, if one feels a pleasant feeling, one is not trapped. So normally a pleasant feeling traps us because we react with attachment, with desire, with obsession. So then we're trapped by our own obsession. And he says, if one feels a painful feeling, one is not trapped. So normally we're trapped by our own aversion, our own negativity. But since in both of these cases we're practicing mindfulness and equanimity, then we're not trapped by those feelings. Those feelings just come and go without disturbing us. And the Buddha says, if he feels a neutral feeling, he is not trapped. So what traps us with neutral feelings is that we usually don't pay any attention to them. We're not interested. So that's cultivating mindlessness rather than mindfulness. But since we're training ourselves to pay attention to all feelings equally, then we're not falling into that tendency towards ignorance and delusion and mindlessness either. We're giving full, mindful, non-reactive attention to every feeling that arises, regardless of whether we perceive it as pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. And so the Buddha sums up, he says, monks, this is called an educated disciple of the noble ones, is not trapped by birth, decay, death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, depression, and anguish. He is not trapped by dissatisfaction, I say. So this actually is a way of describing an enlightened being. An enlightened being is not trapped by birth and death. An enlightened being is not affected by sorrow or depression or anguish. An enlightened being is completely free from all dukkha. So the Buddha here is also implicitly saying that through this practice of mindful, non-reactive attention to feeling, so painful feeling, pleasant feeling, and neutral feeling, through using that as a practice, it's possible to attain awakening. And there's many other suttas where the Buddha makes similar statements, where he states that one who fully understands pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral has nothing more they need to do. Again, stating that they've attained full awakening through proper attention to the nature of feeling. So this practice of being mindfully present with painful feeling and without reaction then is a central and critical component of our practice, as it leads directly to full awakening. So the Buddha concludes, monks, this is the difference, the distinction, the variance between an educated disciple of the noble ones and an uneducated commoner. And then the sutta concludes with a short poem, as is common in with the shorter suttas. The poem says, the wise one who has learned much does not feel pleasure or pain. This is the great distinction between a steadfast, wholesome one and a commoner. When one has learned much of the recognized teachings, seeing clearly both this world and other worlds, then one's mind is not agitated by desirable things or aversive towards what is undesirable. For that one, both approval and rejection have been vaporized, have disappeared, and do not exist. Having known the path, flawless and sorrowless, one fully understands and transcends existence. So that's the end of the sutta. So we can end with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And at this time, I can take any questions that you might have.
All right. Thank you, Bhante, for sharing Dhamma with us. And thank you, friends, for joining us this morning. Good to see you, Kumu, Anita, Dan, Xavras from Poland. Great. Senior. Dan is watching from Sydney. Wonderful. Great. And Paul as well. All right. We have a few friends from down under. Good to see you. Kamal, Geeta, Sunil, Venerable Gyanaratna. Good to see you, Venerable. Ashanika, Upul, Edward, a little bit closer than watching from Manhattan, and Elaine, Geeta. Let's see. Oh, Upulga is also watching from Sydney. Wonderful. Kumo asks, there you go. Regarding painful physical feelings, if the pain persists, isn't it important to be smart about it and seek medical help without being aversive, etc.? Personally, my pain tolerance is high.
Yeah, of course you should be practical. So first off, it's important to distinguish between two kinds of pain. So there is the ordinary aches of having a body. So your body produces a lot of painful sensations, which don't really mean anything. They're just caused by having a body. So those you don't need to do anything about. You just practice mindful equanimity towards them. But there's also painful sensations which indicate some kind of physical damage happening. So, for example, if you grab a knife by the blade instead of by the handle, well, that's going to produce a painful sensation. But it's not something to ignore because you actually are damaging the body. So your hand is being sliced open. So that's something that you need to pay attention to and get some medical help. Similarly, if you're doing sitting meditation with really bad posture, you might experience some pain, which is actually caused by you damaging your back or your legs or something. But if you're sitting with good posture, you're still going to experience pain, but it's going to be meaningless pain. Pain which you just need to learn how to tolerate and not be bothered by. So in either case, our practice is to be undisturbed. So again, practicing mindfulness and equanimity. But you do need to make a distinction between the kind of pain that you just endure because it doesn't mean anything versus the kind of pain which indicates a medical problem or physical damage that you need to do something practical about. So there is a distinction.
Kumu also says, actually, there was a follow-up. Personally, my pain tolerance is high, and because of that, I almost lost my life 7 years ago. So that is stupidity as opposed to being smart about the pain and seeking medical help, right?
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah, I'm happy you got the medical attention.
And hello to Ginny. Hello, Sira from Germany. And Victor from Queens. Yay, our friend. Good to see you. Xauras asks, I find being with physical pain easy. I suffered a lot of different concussions and ailments, but I have a harder time with strong emotional pain. Certain people have strong emotional impact on me. How to let go of emotional pain if all my mind wants to do is to escape? It is almost like a panicking animal.
Well, the first thing is learning how to be present with and fully aware of the emotional experiences. And this might be a long process. So you can't necessarily expect quick results. So the path towards enlightenment takes a very, very long time. You'll see various numbers in different places, not in the suttas. The suttas don't specify how long it takes, but some of the later Buddhist traditions give numbers to it, such as 3 eons. That's one traditional number, is it takes 3 eons of continuous practice to attain awakening. I wouldn't put too much importance on that number, but the point is it takes a long time. That's the bad news. The good news is we don't know how long we've already been working on this path. So we might already be 2.9 eons along. The bad news is that even 1/10 of an eon is still a really long time. So hopefully we're like 2.99999 eons of the way. It's possible. It's possible. Point being, though, is that when we're dealing with any kind of very strong tendency of mind, so in your case, you're talking about a lot of difficulty handling uncomfortable emotions. Well, it's going to take us some time to get through that. So be patient with yourself. Be patient with yourself, but try to push your limits a little bit more each time. So again, the first thing is paying full attention to the sensation. So whether it's physical or emotional actually doesn't matter. The practice is exactly the same. Pay full attention to the emotion. Don't try to ignore it or cover it up. Don't try to distract yourself from it. Pay full attention to it and recognize that it's just a temporary condition arising based upon causes, coming and going in its own way, and that fundamentally it isn't a problem. It's only a problem if we make it a problem. Otherwise, it's just a natural part of the human experience. You don't need to make a big deal out of it. Yeah, and over time it gets easier. The other thing also is when we encounter a really difficult part of Buddhist practice, some part which seems insurmountably challenging, then what can really help is to focus on building up all the other parts of the Buddhist path. Because all the different aspects of the Buddhist path are mutually supporting. So if you're having a really hard time dealing with some particular part of Buddhist practice, then focus on other parts. So if your meditation is difficult, well, okay. Focus on your generosity. Focus on your morality. Focus on study. And as you do those things, then you'll notice that your meditation practice starts to improve. Even though you're not directly working on it necessarily, the fact that you're working on the supportive conditions also supports your meditation practice as well. Okay.
Thank you, Bhante. And Sira asks, what would you advise if a mental pain is sometimes so strong that it is hard to be mindful or rational? Try to concentrate on the body sensation or try to meditate anyway?
So I don't see concentrating on the body sensation and meditating as being opposite things. So concentrating on body sensation is a style of meditation. Properly speaking, it's Vedanānupassana, which is the second of the 4 Satipatthana. So that's primarily an insight practice. There's a concentration component to it, but it's primarily an insight practice. So yeah, if you're having very strong painful sensation to the point where you're having a hard time doing whatever meditation technique you want to be doing, well, let go of your wish to do that other meditation and just focus on the feeling. Focus on that painful feeling. Practice mindfulness and equanimity with that painful feeling. That is your practice for the time being. And eventually we need to learn how to get over our reaction towards pain. We need to learn how to get over our negativity towards pain. This is a part of the path to awakening. We need to face it at some point. Okay.
Thank you, Bhante. That was the last question online, but since we have a few minutes, I wanted to, well, does anyone here have any questions? No? Okay, great. Then if I could ask you to perhaps talk a little bit about the correlation between anusaya, so latent tendency, and asavas.
Is that on topic?
Yes, of course it is. Asavas cause pain.
Bhante Sumita, what's the relationship between anusaya and asava? It's so lovely having a senior monk here.
I think they are more difficult defilements to remove. They have been deep rooted. Like anusayati is to sleep. Anusaya is to sleep in the really at the very deep bottom. So mostly the other defilements we can get rid of them, like simple defilements, but those things will always be difficult because you really have to really open up. Just like we wash our hands, if we have something, we can with just water we can remove something in us, and then in some cases we need to maybe use some soap or something, or sometime in clothes we also can wash, but certain things will not be removed just like that. And similarly, some of those defilements, avijja, something really difficult to recognize, really difficult to identify, because that will always fool us. you know, it's difficult. So you really have to open up, um, dig deep into that profound, in-depth um, defilements, and that way only we can get rid of the anusaya. So that is why, for example, the Arahanta monk also is called asavakkaya. Asavakkaya jnana means you get rid of that asava. Asava also means to, like, what do you call, uh, canker, right?
Mm.
Yeah. So asavati is to uh, like how do we say, like it is going down
Like
or
flowing.
flowing,
Yeah.
something like that. So asava and anusaya, I think they are more related, plus they are more difficult to catch up with our normal mundane activities. Although we do very wholesome, even with meditation, even with jhana, those things will not be able to catch up. Like we have to get rid of the defilements in three levels. It is a tadanga, vikambana, and samucheda. So in jhana, we actually um, temporarily suppress our five, what do you call, five hindrances. But then other defilements can only be completely eliminated when you attain those four sainthoods. Uh, until then, those anusayas and asavas will still be there with us.
Thank you, Bhante.
What were they in English?
What's that?
Sleep and what?
So anussaya is usually translated underlying tendency, or just tendency.
Latent tendency.
Yeah, and asava is translated different ways. It's translated as taint or corruption or canker. Yeah, those are some of the more common translations. Yeah, so they both refer to very deep, powerful subconscious defilements. Kind of like the source for the more obvious defilements of mind. So like the anusyas are this very strong subconscious tendency that we have towards desire, aversion, and ignorance. And then that manifests with us having like visible desires and so on. So it's kind of like if there's a plants and like seeds in the ground, like weeds. There's all these seeds for weeds in the ground. So then when it rains and there's sun, then those sprout and they grow up and we can see them. So you go and you cut down the weeds, but they're still all there beneath the surface. They'll just grow up again. So our practice, we think that we're dealing with our desire and aversion, but we're actually just dealing with what's visible above the surface. So you need to dig deep down and find the deeper layers which it's growing from in the first place.
What happens when you can't stop them from growing? Like last night I couldn't sleep. It was like 1 a.m. and I was still awake, and it's just, you know, processing like
Sometimes you need to change strategy.
delusion, I guess.
So general rule of thumb is if what you're doing isn't working, do something else. So if you're trying one technique and it's not helping, then do something different. Try a different technique. Sometimes all you can do is just sit back and watch the show. You just sit back and watch the show with a kind of detached amusement. Like, oh, there's my mind doing that crazy stuff again. How cute. If you have that kind of attitude, then it won't bother you as much. Yeah. Anything else?
Yeah, there are a few things, but also Bhante Sankicha
welcome.
is present. Hello, Bhante,
Great.
who gives a little short definition. Asavas are just mental impurities, anusayas are hidden or underlying tendencies.
Okay, great.
And
Thank you.
actually, I think, Bhante, I'm going to ask you perhaps to give a series on these. So I'm going to send a message to Bhante Sankicha.
Oh, that's a great idea.
Who
Yeah.
will be also sharing Dhamma tomorrow evening on our channel at 7:30 p.m. So stay tuned for Bhante Sankicha live. And Sira asks, did I understand it right that an arahant can have painful feelings, but it is not suffering from them and therefore does not have dukkha?
So what I would say is that an arahant still has sensations. And they have sensations which could be perceived as pleasant and sensations which could be perceived as painful. But they do not respond with negativity towards the painful, and they do not respond with desire towards the pleasant. So one perspective is you could then say that they don't experience pleasure and pain. That's one way you can talk about it. And that's actually in the sutta, in the poem towards the end, the first line says, the wise one who has learned much does not feel pleasure or pain. So what's meant by that is that they're not falling into the obsessive desire that ordinary people have, which leads to them constantly pursuing pleasure. And they're not falling activity and aversion, which generates mental pain in response to physical pain. But another way of talking is that they still experience pleasure and pain, they're just not disturbed by it. They don't have any desire or aversion towards it. So yeah, one way of talking is that an awakened being doesn't feel pleasure or pain. Another way is saying that they do feel pleasure and pain, but it doesn't affect their purity of mind at all. They don't react to it. So it's just different ways of defining the terms.
Thank you. And Geeta, Shifu Simplicity wasn't feeling too well this morning, so that's why we have Bhante Suddhaso instead. Last minute, we had to change the schedule, but she will appear to give the last teaching of the series at a certain point when she feels better, so don't worry. And Xavara says, well, I think I opened a big Pandora's box, so now all the questions. What's the meaning of heedfulness? I find it hard to understand this term or how it is different from mindfulness or alertness.
So that word is not mentioned in the sutta, so that is definitely off topic. So anusaya is mentioned in the sutta. So the question about anusaya and asava is at least somewhat on topic. But the subject of appamada, commonly translated heedfulness, that's off topic. So we can talk about that one another time.
So I'll set it up on our list of things to do. So Anita, maybe it will be all in the topic for Bhante Sankicha, since he's also studying Western psychology. I think it would be an interesting thing of him talking about all of these different elements, because Anita also has the question of what would some examples of deep-rooted asavas. Can you please type the 3 levels that Bhante just mentioned? But I don't know.
Tadanga, Vikambana, Samucheda.
Can you?
Yeah, those are 3 ways of dealing with defilement.
I just remembered 3 examples. For example, a banana tree, if you cut the top of the tree, the whole tree will be gone. For example, a coconut tree, if you cut from the middle, it will not be growing again. But the Bodhi tree, even if you cut from the beginning, it will still grow. You really have to take everything out. It's a very strong. So there are certain things like I would like to say Tadanga is like a banana tree. Vikambana is like a coconut tree. And Samucheda is like a Bodhi tree.
Do the Japanese knotweed?
Yeah, the Japanese knotweed. Everybody here knows that it's my obsession plant. All right, and Victor asks, why in the Mahaparinibbana Sutta the Buddha sound in pain? Why he didn't make the pain go away with super ability?
So the Buddha still had a body. So as I was mentioning earlier, bodies produce sensations. And those of us who are not enlightened tend to think of these in terms of painful, pleasant, and neutral. So the Buddha was still experiencing what we would call painful sensation. The difference is that he wasn't bothered. He saw that it's just a body doing the things that bodies do. So he wasn't the least bit bothered. So he saw that his body was very sick. He saw that his body was going to die, but he wasn't upset. So that's the difference. As for why the Buddha didn't just make the sensations go away, well, he didn't make the sensations go away because he didn't have any negativity towards them. He didn't have any aversion towards those sensations. So he had no desire to make those sensations go away. There was no point in doing so. You only want to make a sensation go away if you hate that sensation. The Buddha did not hate it, so he saw no reason to try to get rid of it. So of course the Buddha could have, if he wanted to get rid of those sensations. I'm sure he could have, but there's no point to it. There's no reason. So yeah, it's only if your mind is full of defilement, then you want to get rid of pain. If your mind is free from defilement, then you just mindfully accept pain. Okay.
And last question is from Anita. Would you say there could be some past life seeds of anusaya?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, a lot of our anusayas are built up over the course of many, many, many lifetimes. That's part of why they're so deeply rooted in the mind and why they're so powerful and so difficult to uproot.
All right. And I think that's all for this morning. Thank you so much, Bhante Suddhaso, and thank you also, Bhante Sumita, for joining in and elaborating on some of the questions. And thank you, friends, for joining us this morning to study the Dhamma. If there wasn't all this interest, we wouldn't be doing these programs. So thank you for thanking us, but you can also thank yourself to all the people typing in the live chat. All right, so we can end the morning with 3 sadhus.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.